Well, it really is a real privilege for me to drive up the hill from Rosebank and to be with you today. And as I mentioned, I'm the dad of two girls, so that means I've been surrounded by women for most of my life. And the blessing of girls is that they gang up with their mother against you. So whenever we have disagreements or we want to go somewhere, it's always lonesome me against the three ladies in my life. But when my girls were younger, they used to remind me that, hey, Dad, don't forget about Nugget, our little Yorkie. Dad, he's a male. But if you ever come to my house and meet Nugget, he has to be the thickest dog on the planet. So he really doesn't help my cause. I don't see him as part of my team at all. But also as a dad of girls, I've had to attend certain concerts at the FNB Stadium. One of those was Justin Bieber. Those of you who were there that night will remember it just poured and poured and poured. So I took one for the team there. The weird thing about it was that suddenly as Bieber came out, everybody started screaming my name, Justin, Justin. So that was very awkward. But for a moment, I did feel quite flattered, the whole of FNB Stadium. But then I also had to go to the One Direction concert. Remember One Direction? Kind of came and went. My wife has a selfie of us on the park and ride bus. We left from the Dome, and she's in the front of the bus. I'm sitting next to her, and you can see the whole bus, and I'm the only male on that entire bus going to hear One Direction. So maybe you're thinking, okay, why on earth am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because this will be the first and the last time that I ever quote One Direction. They have a song, and it goes, "That's what makes you beautiful." That's what makes you beautiful. So I want to ask you this morning, as we think about Women's Day coming up, what do you think makes someone beautiful? What makes you beautiful? See, we live in a broken and a fallen world, and from the moment that Adam and Eve committed sin in Genesis chapter 3, we've been hiding. Think about it, that exposure, that they hadn't noticed one another's nakedness, and suddenly there was shame and how am I being perceived, and not only did they hide from one another, they also hid from God, and there was kind of like this piercing gaze of people, and we still feel it today. If somebody's staring at you, we feel it's almost like they can see into our soul. We know that we are fallen people. And so we try to cover the blemishes of sin, and we try and hide all of our flaws and try and present ourselves so we can get approval from people. In fact, I'm told that the beauty industry in South Africa alone, just South Africa, our beauty industry is worth $3.2 billion. $3.2 billion, that's what we spend. Clearly you can see I spend nothing, but but I think the pressure of, if I think even 20 years ago, yes, there's always been this pressure and there's always been billboards and magazines, but just the bombardment from Instagram and social media. In my days, I would only find out on Monday that everybody had a party on the weekend and they decided not to invite me. I mean, these days you get to see it live, you've been left out. And so we got filters and we got Photoshop and we're not really sure, is this true, is this not true? And I think probably for most of us, we walk into a room and we think, how am I being perceived? We're kind of self-conscious. Am I beautiful enough today? What do I need to do? Oh, there's this blemish, there's this. But that's a form of self-objectification. And in my years of ministry, I've seen how it's driven girls to eating disorders, just to shame and anxiety and withdrawing, even girls who've cut themselves. And it's driven some even to suicide. And I even think of people that my daughters have told me about who were with them at school, who when they got to first year varsity just couldn't live up to that pressure. Maybe they were one thing at school, now there was this pressure put on them, and they took their lives. It's very sad. So whose benchmark do we use to measure true beauty? So I want us to turn to the last chapter in the book of Proverbs, the last 2 verses, in fact, and we're not going to have time to unpack this whole poem. And so we're just going to look at the beginning of the poem and the end of the poem. That's all we'll have time for this morning. And I've entitled my sermon, Beauty in a Broken World. Beauty in a broken world. And I want us just to look at 3 things, and I hope you'll be able to remember these 3. The measure, the treasure, and the pleasure of true beauty. The measure, treasure, and pleasure of true beauty. So let's have a look. Number 1, the measure of true beauty. And I'm going to read the last 2 verses of the book of Proverbs. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. What a beautiful conclusion to this book of Proverbs on wisdom. You see, if we claim to follow God's wisdom, then we can't use charm as a measure of true beauty. Why? Because the scriptures tell us charm is deceitful. It's deceitful. We all know that the world has psychopaths out there who appear to be one thing and they're not. We also know that some of the prettiest people on the planet, even though they've got charm and external beauty, on the inside they feel worthless. You know, charm is called the halo effect for a reason. And the halo effect is when I meet somebody and I think, okay, they dress nicely, they look attractive, I'm going to make the conclusion that everything else in their life is great. They must be intelligent, they must have a good sense of humor. That's the halo effect, and that's what charm does. It fools us into thinking that this one thing translates to the rest of that person's life, and it may not. Taylor Swift, in a documentary on her life, Miss Americana, it was called, writes this. She says, everyone's a shiny new toy for like 2 years. The female artists that I know of have reinvented themselves 20 times more than the male artists. They have to, or else you're out of a job. Constantly having to reinvent, constantly finding new facets of yourself that people find to be shiny. Be new to us, be young to us, but only in a new way and only in the way we want. And then she said, we're people who got into this line of work because we wanted people to like us. Because we're intrinsically insecure. This is Taylor Swift saying, I'm intrinsically insecure. Because we liked the sound of people clapping because it made us forget how much we feel like we're not good enough. And then she says, I'm tired of it. Nobody physically saw me for a year, and I thought that that's what they wanted. So charm is not the true measure of beauty, but neither is external beauty. Why? Because we're told it's fleeting. And this Hebrew word for fleeting is the word hevel. It's the word to unlock the meaning of the whole of the book of Ecclesiastes. This word that's here appears almost 40 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. And it means a kind of a vapor, a breath, smoke. It's something that you can't really grasp onto. It's like, that's why Ecclesiastes tells us it's like chasing the wind and trying to sort of store it in a bottle. You can't do that. And beauty is like that. It's a mere breath. It slips through our fingers. So I know you came here this morning for some good news, but we're here to celebrate aging. See, beauty is a mere breath because think about it. It changes from culture to culture. That's why it's a mere breath. In some cultures, you've got to have a long neck. In other cultures, they do foot binding so the woman can have small feet. In other cultures, it's plastic surgery. Beauty is fleeting because it changes with history. I mean, listen to Solomon talking to his bride. Your neck is like the Tower of David and your nose like the Tower of Lebanon looking towards Damascus. It's not going to work today. Mainly because we don't know where Damascus is, but but it also changes as we age. And that's the thing. Our beauty is fleeting because all it takes is sickness, illness, some kind of accident, some kind of just scar, some kind of wound. And nothing you eat or drink, nothing you nip or tuck, nothing that you inject or slap on is going to be able to stop the effects of the fall in aging. And there's going to come a day for each of us, if it hasn't already come, when you're going to walk past the mirror and you're going to get a shock because you're going to see an old person staring back at you. I'm going to be 50 in December, and it's starting to happen to me now. I will walk past the mirror, or I'll see a picture that, someone in my family's taken at a distance. I'm thinking, who's that old guy there? Oh, that's me! It's horrible. But as Aristotle once said, time crumbles things. Time is another concept. If you want to read the book of Ecclesiastes, time is one of the things that is just this vanity. It crumbles everything over time. So what do we do with that? If charm's not a measure of true beauty and external beauty is not a measure of true beauty, then what? Should we just resign ourselves to be ugly? Is that what we should do? Just embrace ugliness. Never kind of do ourselves up, just try and look the worst that we can because woe's me, this is fleeting anyway. Maybe we should just join Dr. Victor and the Rasta Rebels and sing that song. Remember it? If you want to be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty woman your life. A pretty woman your wife. So from my personal point of view, get an ugly girl to marry you. Is that what we're saying? Is that what the Proverbs saying? No. Spurgeon says, beauty is fair. It's fair. He says, but we must remember beauty is a fair but fading flower. A fair but fading flower. And so if you build your identity, all of your love on beauty, what happens when it's gone? You're going to be crushed. External beauty is a gift from God. It's a beautiful gift from God, but we've got to use it rightly. In some sense, if you're somebody who maybe is more beautiful than the rest, you have to steward that so wisely. But we have to remember it's fleeting. And so I want to read you something that David Foster Wallace said at Kenyon College in the US back in 2005. It was the commencement speech for the students. He's an American novelist. Very sadly, within 2 years of him giving this speech, he ended up taking his own life. But this has always stuck with me because it is so profound. And this is coming from someone who's not a Christian. And you can see something maybe of what he was even wrestling with. This is what he says. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. If you worship money and things, then you'll never have enough. Never feel you have enough. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you'll always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die 1,000,000 deaths before they finally plant you in the ground. Worship power and you'll feel weak and afraid. You'll need more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you'll end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. Isn't that profound as we think about that? That's what verse 30 is saying. It's saying charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but here it is. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Here's the source and the fountain of all true beauty. It's found in God. It's found in Christ. God defines beauty. And you and I have to pursue a beauty that is solid, that is long-lasting, that can surpass all fads and fashions and cultures and ages and seasons in our own life. A woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. But what does it mean to fear the Lord? It can be quite a, I suppose, confusing thing to understand, because fear means that I should be running away. So what is this fear of the Lord? Well, In the book of Exodus, this is just one verse and one example. Exodus chapter 20, Moses has come down from the mountain. It says the people are afraid and there's trembling and there's smoke. And then Moses says to the people, don't be afraid. I want you to fear God. That's a summary. And we think, don't be afraid, but at the same time we need to fear God. This is exactly what he says. He says, do not be afraid, he says to the people. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. And so we could spend a lot of time on this, but I think there's two different ways we could fear God. The one is unholy fear, which moves away from God, and then a holy fear that moves towards God with awe and with reverence. I like to think of it, I've never been to the edge of the Grand Canyon, but I like to think if I was there, because I love heights, there'd be something that would draw me towards the edge. Would I be trembling? Yes, but there's a sense in which I've just got to see. Whereas unholy fear says like, that's not for me, and steps away and misses out on this grand vista. Maybe it's like last year, I think it was, maybe some of you experienced it, that fighter jet that flew over our houses at low altitude. Oh my word, it was like exhilarating and fearful and all at the same time. And I think that's what it's like with God. We're under the Niagara Falls in that little boat and we're scared, but at the same time, it's just the grandeur, the beauty. And so holy fear recognizes that God is our great creator. There's an infinite distance between God and us. That should make us tremble. There's one line from a hymn that Isaac Watts wrote, talking about God's greatness and our puniness, and it always impacts me. Here it is. Worms have learned to lisp thy name. Worms have learned. We are the worms when we compare ourselves to God, and we've learned by God's grace to whisper his name. But holy fear also recognizes God's not just this distant creator, he's our Father. In the gospel, we have a filial fear, a son-like, daughter-like kind of fear and respect. You know, the times when I think when my girls were younger and maybe we were playing some game in the dark and I was a monster, and then there came a point where it's like, actually, Dad really is a monster, and they're scared, and then I've got to comfort them. No, I'm not really a monster. Please don't tell the police I'm a monster, you know. And this is the staggering thought. How can a great God be a good God and a good God to me? To us as his people, unworthy, undeserving. It staggers the mind. It should make us tremble because we're continually doing things to provoke and to sort of stain his glory, so to speak. We need to run towards God for more grace. That's what a true child of God does. There's this trembling, but actually as scary as God maybe seems in his greatness, actually he's my Father. I can just come near. Where else am I going to go to find cleansing for my sin? And I think of some of the God-fearing women that I've had the privilege of knowing and meeting over years of ministry. They fear the Lord. He's big in their eyes. You know, there's a book that was written, When God is Small and People Are Big. Or maybe it's When People Are Big and God is Small. It's about the fear of man, which the book of Proverbs talks about, where we're so concerned about people because think you love whatever you fear. You fear for your children because you love them. You fear for job security because you love your job. So we need to fear God in that sense. And so there's this beauty that comes from some of the women I've seen. I think of a lady in KwaZulu-Natal. And the church there had opened a hospice in Mpopomeni Township for people who were suffering from HIV and AIDS and others who had terminal illness. And this lady went every single week simply to sit with them and cut their toenails. Just to cut their nails and to encourage them. I don't know how many weeks she did that. She did that for as long as I remember. And only in heaven will we know how many of those lives were impacted because she feared God, she loved the Lord, and nothing was too low for her to do. I think of single mothers, maybe some of you, you're just shouldering this responsibility, and yet you've still come to church today. You've still said, Lord, I want to fear you, I want to worship you, I want to honor you. I think of gogos who have to look after grandchildren because maybe parents have moved away or died. I think of girls, particularly in townships, who are heading up child-headed households. Just so many women, wives who are sacrificing for their kids. Women who fear God, who are captains of industry right up the hill here in Santon. And then what about the vast army of God-fearing women down through the centuries? Do you know that some of the leading sociologists say that 2/3 of the early church was women? Women could find a dignity in Christianity, and we don't have time to look at that they couldn't find in Roman and Greek culture. No wonder this secular pagan philosopher, do you know what he said? His name's Libanius. He said, "What women these Christians have. What women these Christians have." So we praise such women because the measure of their beauty is that they fear the Lord. So that's the measure of true beauty. Number 2, the treasure of true beauty. And this, we now want to jump to the very first verse of this poem. We've been at the back end, let's jump to the beginning. And as I said, we're not going to cover the actual poem in the middle. But verse 10 says, "A wife of noble character, who can find? She's worth far more than rubies." Now, I think the English words for wife and noble character are really weak. They don't capture the strength of the Hebrew. In fact, the word in Hebrew for wife and woman is the exact same word, so you have to always look at the context. I believe this would be better translated as the woman of noble character. Why? Yes, she's a mom. Yes, she's a wife. But her influence, if you were to read the poem, goes far beyond her family, it spreads out into the community to the point, as we saw in verse 31, people are praising her at the city gates, the hub of business and commerce. But also this translation, noble character, is just such a bland translation. This Hebrew phrase normally is associated with armies and strength. It was used of Old Testament war heroes. So I want you to just get the picture of the strength that's here. This woman is like a great hero of the faith. In fact, the phrase is used of Ruth. And when it's used of Ruth, she's unmarried at the time and doesn't have children. So this doesn't just apply to those who are moms or wives. One commentator says that he would call this poem a hymn to a valiant woman. A hymn to a valiant woman. So here's my translation. A woman of strength who can find, or a woman of substance who can find. She's worth far more than rubies. She is treasured in her family if she's married, in the community. And a woman who fears the Lord, puts God first, prays regularly, seeks God's face in His word, seeks to be filled with God's Spirit, seeks to mold her character upon the word of God. And so she's of immeasurable value to all who know her. But there's something else that you might not see when you look at this poem, and that's the way it's composed. It's an acrostic. So there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Each of these 22 verses begins with the subsequent letter of the alphabet. So whoever authored this poem didn't want to just tell us what beauty was. He or she, because it may have been Lemuel's mother. We see she's at the beginning of Proverbs 31. Maybe she penned this. Maybe it was Solomon. Maybe it was someone else. We're not sure. But it's this beautiful acrostic. It's to say, I want this labor of love, this artistic thing of trying to harness every letter of the alphabet to comprehensively describe this woman, A to Z, of her beauty. It's just a wonderful, wonderful picture. And it's for that reason we must treasure her, because we started by going to the summit. I didn't want us to get locked in the detail of the poem. I wanted us to climb past her accolades, her achievements, and I wanted us to go up on top where we were. The source of her beauty is Christ, God. But here's the thing. Do you think the Proverbs 31 woman is meant to be a to-do list and a checklist for all women everywhere? Maybe when you came today and you heard it was Women's Day, it's like, oh no, this guy's standing up, Proverbs 31. No, not that woman, I hate her. She makes me look bad. Maybe that's what you thought. Well, if you want to be her, you probably have to be Wonder Woman. I mean, if you've got the text open in front of you and you want to just glance at the poem there, I mean, you're going to see her range of skills. You're going to see her reservoirs of energy. I mean, she gets up early. She stays up late. I've never met anyone that's both a morning person and a night person. I mean, she's an organizer. She oversees an estate. She works hard. She even works out. It talks about her strong arms. The Hebrew of one verse says she girds her loins, which means she kind of picked up a dress, tucked it in, and just got busy with the business of the day. And I'm not exactly sure what a spindle is, but maybe she DJ'd on it. But she was very experienced. She was a woman of industry and activity and benevolence and elegance and kindness and discipline. She plants a vineyard. She sells things. She's an importer and an exporter. Her husband loves her, and her children rise up, go on social media and tag her, #blessed. For most of us, I mean, we can't even get our children to rise, but this woman, her children rise and call her blessed. And she doesn't even consume goods, she produces them. She's giving back to the environment. And then after all of this, she still has time to open her hand to the poor and to the needy. I think very few Jewish women at the time would have been able to emulate her. Because they didn't have her wealth, they didn't have her legal status. She's almost like this royal, regal, queen-like figure. They wouldn't have been able to pull off what she did. And there would have been things in their culture that challenged them about her business and so on. And there are things about her that challenge us in our culture, where we've maybe downplayed motherhood and being married. But is she meant to be a model for all women? Who could this mystery, rare as rubies woman be? Any guesses? Well, I'll tell you next week when you guys invite me back. I'll tell you in a moment. So we've looked at the measure of true beauty, the treasure of true beauty, and now finally, the pleasure. Number 3, the pleasure of beauty. And now we jump all the way back to the concluding verse of the whole of the book of Proverbs. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. In verse 28, her children have praised her. In verse 29, her husband has praised her and said she surpasses all other women. And now in verse 31, you and I, who are part of the community, we are invited to praise such a woman. And even if we should choose not to praise her, her very works will praise her at the city gates. I love what the Message translation says. It says, festoon her life with praise. I don't know, I picture fireworks going off and garlands around. Just this colorful scene. Festoon her with praise. C.S. Lewis said so profoundly, I think we delight to praise what we enjoy because the praise not merely expresses, but completes the enjoyment. Think about it. If you've discovered something amazing, but you're by yourself, it's like, wish I'd had somebody here with me to enjoy this. Or like, there's something when we express that praise that actually is the very consummation of that praise. Lewis says that delight is incomplete till it is expressed. So that's what we have to reflect on. Do you genuinely praise the godly women around you? In your life, in this church, I have no doubt that there are women that have been in this church who are serving just with such faithfulness. And the whole point of us being created in the image of God is that we would represent God to the world in some ways. And yes, the fall has come and that image is marred and tainted, but now that we've been redeemed, we are supposed to be an image of God. That's our true destiny. And every evidence, if we believe in the gospel, every evidence of good that you see in my life or that I see in your life is because Christ died. So then how can we just go along our lives and that kind of praise is unnoticed? We don't call out what we see in others of Christ's grace. I mean, if Christ died for it, it's a kind of like a sacrilegious slap in God's face if he's doing all this work in his people and we never praise, we never encourage, we never affirm. Because every glimmer of good is because Jesus died to make it possible. And so by praising people, ultimately it's God-centered praise. I don't know how it is here at BBC, probably similar to Rosebank, but here in the northern suburbs, we live in a very critical culture where we always tend towards the negative. I mean, for 10 years at Rosebank, my role was pastor of worship. You know how I knew if I was doing a good job? If I heard nothing. If I heard nothing. Because if I only heard from you, what would it be? Were you spelling mistakes on the screen? It was too loud, it was too soft, the auditorium was too hot, too cold. And so it goes. Why do we need drums? Why do we need a flute? But if you hear nothing, you know you're doing a good job. Now, I'm really grateful that things have improved from when I first were there, because I think people are realizing and grasping, even in a greater measure, who God is. But that's sometimes our culture. It's like, well, surely the women in our church know that we love them, but we never express it. And I think today we're being reminded of that, because we also live in a culture of gender-based violence. And I'm not going to give you all those stats and figures because they really are tragic. South Africa really is the rape capital of the world. That's our label. And so this verse is asking and calling and inviting, especially the men here, to stand up and say, we're not going to be silent. We're going to go to the gates and we're going to praise a woman like this. We're going to stand up for the truth. We're not going to be silent against injustice. I think back on last year, and my daughter, with the Pathology Society at Wits, they visited one of our state morgues twice on a Monday morning. What I found interesting is that all of those pathologists that work in those morgues, they're all women. And from 8 till 2 o'clock, essentially they're just carving up people to be able to, crime scenes and capture the evidence and do all of that. I won't even tell you what my daughter told me because I still have these images in my mind and I never even physically saw it. But I said to myself, if this is a snapshot of one weekend in our city and what is done to women, the level of brutality. Men, we have a role to play in standing against such violence. Because I think this Proverbs 31 woman is the key to understand the entire book. I really do. So we do have to ask, who exactly is she? And I think on one level, when you read about her, you say, yes, okay, she's a wife, and she's a mother, and she's a businesswoman, and so on. But I think on another level, she's actually the very personification and embodiment of wisdom. That's why she concludes the book. I don't think she's meant to be this model for women to follow. She's meant to be a model for all of us because she's showing us what wisdom looks like with skin on. If wisdom was a woman and was a mother, these are some of the things. This is over her lifetime. And in the book of Proverbs, there's these two women personified. Woman Folly, who's calling out, come to my house. But she's an adulterer and a prostitute, and her house leads to death. And then there's Woman Folly throughout Proverbs, calling us to come to her house because she has life and wisdom. So who are we going to choose? Death or life? And I believe we have chapter 31 because it brings to completion everything that Proverbs has said about wisdom. You can go and read from chapter 1 to 9 all the way through, and you'll see those attributes mirrored in her life. What's chapter 31? It's a picture of us with the woman of wisdom, settled down with her, and she's providing for us. She's with all of her own that have embraced godly wisdom. Maybe that's why we read in the wisdom literature, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is knowledge, because these things will tie together. Listen to Proverbs 3. Blessed are those who find wisdom. Those who gain understanding, for she is more profitable than silver, yields better returns than gold. She's more precious than rubies. I mean, this is right at the beginning of Proverbs. Nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, in her left hand are riches and honors. Her ways are pleasant ways, her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast will be blessed. So we've seen the true measure, the true treasure, and we've seen now the true pleasure of true beauty. And Proverbs is urging us to turn our backs on woman folly and to embrace this woman of wisdom, our true love. But as we close, can I ask, how is it that this wisdom is so praiseworthy? What's so special about this wisdom that it's so valuable? I mean, we're told that this kind of wisdom is hard to find. Why is it hard to find? Perhaps it's because there's actually only one in whom all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are found. Do you know his name? I think woman wisdom is just a foreshadowing of the one who was to come. The one of whom the Father said, "This is my Son, whom I'm well pleased." In other words, God the Father says, my greatest pleasure is God the Son. God the Son. Is Christ not the fulfillment of all wisdom in Proverbs? Did Christ not say, one greater than Solomon is here? Did Christ not say, wisdom will be proved right by her children? Her children will vindicate her. So if Christ is the embodiment of wisdom, then I have to ask you today, where is his beauty and where is his charm? He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering, familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised and we held him in low esteem. But surely he took up our pain, bore our sufferings, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. I want you to maybe close your eyes and in your mind's eye, imagine Christ on the cross. They mocked him. They mutilated him. They blemished his face with their spit. They hung up his body, half naked, exposed for everybody to laugh and mock. And every ugly deed and every wicked thought we've ever thought from every person on the planet was thrown upon him and was festering in his wounds. Every heinous act of rebellion was like concentrated acid thrown at his brow, and as it dripped down, it completely disfigured him, defaced him with shame. How hideous, how repulsive, how loathsome is his complexion on the cross. Can any of you here today see any true beauty in this man on the cross? And I have to ask, were there any at the foot of the cross this day that could see past the facade of perfectly manicured Roman nails piercing skin and flesh? Were there any on this day who could look past this face mask of blood and sweat and look through all the externals and see the true beauty? Were there any? At church, there were some who saw through the external facade. And you know who they were? They were the women. It was the woman who stood at the cross. It was the woman who wept. It was the woman who watched him taken down from the cross. It was the woman who went to prepare burial spices. It's the woman who got up early. It's the woman who went to the tomb. It's the woman who first saw him risen. It's the woman who then declared the good news of the gospel. And where were the men on Good Friday? I'll tell you where they were. They'd abandoned, they'd fled, they'd betrayed, they'd denied. They were the ones who on Good Friday couldn't see beyond the externals. The men were the ones who couldn't see any beauty hanging on the cross. So what did they do? They ran away instead of going to those city gates to praise. And so it's here at the cross, my friends, that we hear echoes of a tune that we've heard before in Proverbs 9. Wisdom has built her house. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She's also set her table. She's sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city, "Let all who are simple come to my house." To those who have no sense, she says, "Come eat my food and drink the wine I've mixed. Leave your simple ways and you will live." That's the call to us this morning, that we would leave our simple ways of folly and just come to Christ again. Maybe you don't see it, but he's working to present you as his radiant bride. What does Paul say in Ephesians? Without stain or wrinkle or blemish, holy and blameless. Jesus Christ is the measure, the treasure, and the pleasure of true beauty. And there's only one road to life, only one path to wisdom, only one way to the Father. And I have to say it, and only one direction to Christ. Only one direction to Christ. And you know what? That's what makes you beautiful.